how are you today? Well, this is the Global Justice Seminar for today, and it's 54 years after Kent State. What's been learned on US campuses? But before we start, please remember to help us with your donations. So our center continues working here in Mexico and continues with all the programs we have for the future and all the travels to Cuba and to other places. Bob Datz, the center's presenter for May 27, entered those years as a wide-eyed college freshman who entered KSU majoring in law enforcement. Developing a critical eye prior to the shooting, he honed that reflex over decades in journalism and finally environmental science. He worked for daily newspapers in Maine and Massachusetts after leaving college to work in the once lively alternative press until 1980. His street and rural activities over the decades have included activists for peace, human rights, science, technology, and economics, labor justice, and maintaining a habitable planet. So let's start with your presentation, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you, Lulu, and I'm glad to be able to present to an organization that I so much support. I might be the center's first presenter to confess to being a bonehead, and that was the beginning of the evolution that kind of led me on down a different path. During the period of time in the mid-'60s, as I was going through high school, I was basically a prankster and minimalist when it came to academics. um, I did have an awareness of very close personal eyewitness, not to the danger of it, but to the repression after the riots in the 66 riots in the Cleveland neighborhood of Huff, and then in 68 in Glenville. I was down there every week or two because I had to take the bus, and that's where it let me off to go get my allergy shots. It was a ghetto area that abutted an academic and professional area where I got saw the doctor. In my prankster role, my friends and I thought it would be a hoot to go listen to George Wallace speak at a gathering of thousands of people in the public hall in Cleveland, and it was a little bit jaw dropping, even given the fact that we went in there for a hoot. In 1968, the Democratic Convention and the police riot, as it was later called, that led to the beatings and arrests of people, including journalists and as well as legitimate protesters, did get my attention. At that point, I was starting to look at colleges, and I had two. I had two paths that I looked at seriously, and one was pre-law at Tennessee. And had I gone to Tennessee, I'm sure my path would have been vastly different. And the new discipline of law enforcement at Kent State, because my thinking was that police work is legitimate work. It serves a public purpose. This is a discipline that needs help. And the academic aspect emerging at that time, I thought was a good idea based on what we saw that wasn't apparent at Chicago. So I ended up opting to go into Kent State, a public college that was known as a party college. The saying being, if you can't go to college, go to Kent, which fit my bonehead uh, mentality perfectly. And for some reason, they wanted me in the honors college. My test scores weren't very good. My grades weren't very good. The bonehead was still alive and kicking and said, in response to finding out that I would not have to take freshman English if I went into the honors colloquium, that's for me. It turned out that the honors colloquium changed my life, and the honors college uh, colloquia that I took through the 4 years that I was, well, the 3 years that I was full time on campus. Um, it was a quarter system, 3 quarters to an academic year, 10 weeks, sometimes 11. And everyone stayed together with one professor, interdisciplinary teaching staff, very progressive dean of the Honors College, who we lost to help become a founding dean at Hampshire College in Massachusetts. Um, and in that family, in that little collective, was Allison Krauss, who is one of the 4 students who were massacred on May 4th, 1970, at the end of the freshman year. We weren't we weren't social friends outside of the class, but the class itself was a hard to describe experience that took me from reading the sports page and the comics pages into things where I wasn't really secure. I didn't really feel I had what the other kids had going. Allison was one of those people who was self assured in a way that was not egotistical at all. And in private side conversations, gave me a lot of confidence in my ability to just put down the sports page and think about other things. Of course, the reading list did too, and that was very difficult. It was a tough evolution. As that year progressed, I do want to catch up on my visuals. So let us go to see Allison in October of 1969, when I was still really barely into this process. She was already collecting in this photo for the Student Mobilization Committee, which I don't recall if that was the nationwide name, but it certainly was the umbrella organization that we had um, opposing the war, which included uh, people of ideology and no ideology, and was an excellent vehicle for someone like myself. Uh, in any event, I got there late to the dance. Meanwhile, we know about all the context going on in the U.S. at that time. At Kent, it was still a jock college in a lot of ways, uh, and yet there was an SDS core group there. It was a local core group, not an outside agitator group. But I was in this college, the honors college of a college that really did have a lot to offer, and especially through the honors college. Um, April 30th. Now we're in spring quarter. I started out also as a bonehead. I also decided that I would go into ROTC to avoid the gym requirement. So I'm very nimble at avoiding requirements at this point. And by the spring quarter, however, I was out of law enforcement, and I was an undeclared major. One of the books that really affected me was The Vietnam Reader, which included a lot of different opinions, and I still like that type of approach to learning about a subject or even a question that pops up in conversation. Um, in any event, as Alan Canfora, who was one of the wounded students a few days later, said, looking back, we were all yelling at the TV, and I'm hoping that some of you can relate to that. Because President Nixon made that happen an awful lot. So I was doing my thing as an undeclared major and had plans to go hitchhiking down to Ohio University that weekend. And I missed, physically present, I missed a lot of the weekend lead up. I have been working with it long enough to be fairly conversant in it. But on Friday night, May 1st, in reaction to the invasion of Cambodia, as colleges all over the country were breaking into serious disruptions and protests, um, downtown was always the place to be for a party school with a lot of bars. And that night, it had a strong dose of politicization, you know what I'm talking about, and a little dash of bikers and a lot of regular folks. And of course, we're going to talk about how folks are in different stripes when it comes to issues, crowds, and crowd dynamics. So there was a bunch of windows broken after one individual was tossed out of a bar, and things erupt. The townspeople in this predominantly white Protestant county were alarmed. The mayor was alarmed. The people he talks to are the shopkeepers. They were super alarmed. And there was, in his mind, the governor called and offered assistance and promised that the guard would be put on alert. Which guard would be put on alert? The week before, the National Guard, weekend warriors as they were called, were present at a Teamsters strike. If anybody has ever dealt with Teamsters, especially back in that era, you can understand that you're dealing with a real potential for violence. Now, are they a labor organization? At that time, that was debatable. In any event, there was nothing done by the Guard. Nothing. There were no fingers lifted in any way against the Teamsters pickets, and they were not being a welcome wagon committee for the National Guard. It was tense. That evening, after the disturbance downtown, and the police came in and basically closed the downtown and pushed the street people back up toward the campus. There were a lot of jeering going back and forth, but it was primarily peaceful. And at some point, there was a walk around the campus, starting with about 300 students and swelling to a couple thousand. And someone walking by the ROTC building, which was a wooden barracks that dated from World War II when they were mustering out soldiers, went in a window, lit a curtain on fire, and it started to burn. As the firefighters responded, someone cut a hose. They were able to get the fire under control fairly readily. In the meantime, the guard was called in. There was a flare up in the fire, and it started back up. And this time, when the firefighters came back, they brought with them National Guardsmen in the Jeeps. Now we have a whole different ballgame because the word occupation doesn't sit well with anybody. And we had a very tense town, and the crowd was then dispersed, and they were threatening students. There was a little bit of knife point stuff going on, but not as much as the following evening. That is bayonet point. They were armed with M1 rifles, which are for that at that time you could have had an M16, but these were the guardsmen, and they got the bottom of the barrel. That was Friday. Saturday night, or Saturday, I'm sorry, there was another sit-in basically, and that got pushed back onto the campus, and an alleged curfew was put into effect. Sunday was a schizophrenic day, and that's when I came back. There's an image of I'm going to get to this image momentarily. Nope, this one of a flower in a guardsman's gun. There are different accounts that say that Alison Krauss, who definitely spoke with this gentleman, put the flower there. There's other accounts that say that he put it there. And there's also a story that his officer in charge came by and told him to take it out. The
Bob,
mood
are
on the
you-
campus
Bob,
as I
are you
returned.
trying to share an image? Because we're not seeing anything.
Oh gosh, hold on.
Did
So
you
here we
share
go.
your screen?
Okay, are we sharing?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, that's Allison, obviously, that I referred to earlier in the collection process for the anti-war. Oh, okay. And here's the soldier. At the same time, while there was this somewhat easygoing, a little distance being kept, Allison's approach to this guy was not typical, but there was a little bit of schmoozing going on. There was a declaration being made by the governor of Ohio, and I'm going to continue to share, but I have to get out. Okay, I've got out of screen share. Okay, that's good. Now I'll minimize Zoom, and we can pick up where we are supposed to be. All right, so yes, James Rhodes, the Republican governor of Ohio, gave a press conference while everybody on campus was fairly, relatively speaking, amicable with the guardsmen. There were hardcore guardsmen that weren't. So there were pockets, and everything really depended on where you are.
Enter at that time Governor James A. Rhodes, who was involved in a U.S. primary fight for the Senate with one of Ohio's most famous political families, Taft. Governor Rhodes knew that the popular theme among Americans at that time was law and order.
We're seen here at the city of Kent, especially, probably the most vicious form of campus-oriented violence yet perpetrated by dissident groups. They make definite plans of burning, destroying, and throwing rocks at police and at the National Guard and the Highway Patrol. This is when we're going to use every part of the law enforcement agency of Ohio to drive them out of Kent. We are going to eradicate the problem. We're not going to treat the symptoms. And these people just move from one campus to the other and terrorize the community. They're worse than the brown shirts and the communist element and also the night riders and the vigilantes. They're the worst type of people that we harbor in America. And I want to say that they're not going to take over a campus.
Okay. Thank you, Governor Rhodes. Let me minimize again and get out of this. I'm sorry. Okay. As we can see that the theme is not dead. The outside agitator myth basically persists. There's a lot of myths that persist around this era. There was the spitting myth of returning veterans from Vietnam being spit upon. A professor at Holy Cross University studied every single report he could find and could not validate one of them. The Scranton Commission, which would later study campus unrest, I'm getting my sources backwards. James Michener, who wrote a book, a fiction writer, but he tried to do meticulous research down the centrist path. Breaking law is not good, shooting people is not good, said that there could be no evidence of outside agitators of a criminal nature, even though there had been some SDS students at Kent who later became wanted, connecting to these events. So here we have a situation currently where we have campuses that are roiled. And
well, I want to ask you here, just to switch topics. The city has been in the spotlight, obviously, nationally the last couple of days because of the protest at Columbia and then NYU, and it spread all over the country. Yesterday, House Speaker Mike Johnson stood up at the podium, said that things are so bad that not only should the university president at Columbia be fired, but that maybe the National Guard should be brought in. To me, that's an indictment on the NYPD that you're not covering it properly. One, do you see it that way? And two, what are your thoughts about that comment that maybe the National Guard should be brought in?
Well, first of all, I think he should look at his own home state and talk about where they need to deploy the National Guards and movement. New Yorkers would tell you we have the finest police department on the globe. And not only do we we had to deal with over 500 protesters. Look at what's happening across the entire country, and you see how well they handled this situation. Number one, the constitutional right to protest. I protested as a young man against the South African apartheid. But what we're seeing here, and I think is outside agitators, as we saw with the Black Lives Matter marches, where outside agitators, they come and disrupt protests all over the country. We're seeing despicable terminology and words that I think is immoral. It may not be illegal, but it's immoral. We will go onto college campuses, on private college campuses, when the presidents or the institutions call us. That's what we did when we dismantled the tent a few weeks ago. That's what we did this week at NYU.
There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, we've had progress from Chicago, where a police chief of a major city acknowledges that people have a right to protest. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's a very high bar. However, we see something there. We also see a dynamic that we have in the United States today, which is, if I'm a member of the group, it was okay to protest. South African apartheid was okay to protest. Kamala Harris is happy standing up for the rights of groups to which she belongs. There's not necessarily a universal acceptance of messaging from all forms of movement that are justice oriented. And so there's that we have that to unpack. We also have the reprise of the outside agitator theory, and we also have the key statement that they'll come in when they are called by the university. So now we get to the university's response. In Kent, I'm just trying to work my view here. Well, I'll stop to share. In Kent, we have a situation where the university president was out of town, was called back in, and left it to the mayor. He let go. Interestingly, today in the Guardian, there's an article by a European university president who basically tells people how they can make a moment an opportunity and not a moment of repression. I would advise folks to check it out. The college presidents of today were alive and young during what happened at Kent State. I don't know where they went, but they're certainly not engaged in the way that you could accent people's rights and still get educating done. So instead, we have the kind of repression that we have. Just to get back to the events, however, and what I'm seeing on my screen, I think, is not a speaker view. So I hope you're all happy with what you're seeing. In any event, Sunday night became a whole different ballgame. After the governor amplified the vitriol, the sun went down, and the guards started getting rid of people off the campus. Again, the so-called curfew that was never really reached the campus community as a whole was invoked as an excuse to, here's where the knife point thing started. Push people into dorms. Some people literally feared for their lives. One of the things that haunts a lot of us, can even produce a mild PTSD reaction, are low-flying helicopters with searchlights and bullhorn warnings. The one thing we did have communication from, however, on Sunday night, were half-page, handwritten. I guess the technology then would have been either photocopy or mimeograph, ditto machines. Rally noon tomorrow on the Commons. Pigs off campus. We have a new issue here. Pigs off campus. That's front and center. The Commons is an area which had historically been used as an athletic field gathering place for pep rallies and whatnot. And it had a fixture in it called the Liberty Bell. On the other side of the Commons is the burned ROTC building. And are you seeing that now?
Yes.
Thank you. Again, I wanna make that full screen, but I'm having problems doing that without being more awkward than I already am. So you can see the group. I'll use my like they do in the planetarium. Okay, this is the initial group. I was somewhere in this group, and I believe the group got bigger because this area was more full, and there were probably about 400 at the time at which the guard started to move. Now, off to the left over here, out of this frame, there's another side with a whole lot of watching students. This doesn't mean that they were not anti-war. It means that there was a bunch of troops lined up facing the people who were at the Victory Bell. The Victory Bell was rung multiple times. It's here in a stone casing to call the rally just the way they used to call pep rallies back in the day. And again, those days weren't that far gone. At that point, a few minutes after, it was anticipated that we were going to hear speeches. That's what rallies were. Commanding officers in a Jeep. Now, this is a telephoto. Okay, this area here, the grass is in perspective is much larger than you're seeing it, because telephotos will pull together people from different distances. This is probably a good 200-foot circle that they drove in with bullhorn warnings that you must disperse. I could pepper this thing with photos, and with my technological skills on Zoom, probably keep you here 3 days. But the push went this way. The guard flank here, protecting the rubble and whatever else they thought was valuable, started moving, bayonets fixed, and shooting tear gas into this group. The tear gas started to move people up the hill, and some of the canisters were picked up by students in the front as the guard had moved closer and thrown back at them. The flow of people went in two directions. This is Taylor Hall. Went around this direction, which is where I funneled in, and there were more people over here that were taking off this way. We both met at the back of the building, if you could kind of envision that. And at the back of the building, there was a parking lot to the left and a practice field for athletics to the right. Of course, people were yelling things at the guard and throwing fingers. Not anything surprising there. The students were again somewhat split as the guard came over this hill. This is called Blanket Hill. Again, testimony to the the hot date that you have, and you bring your date over to Blanket Hill, and you have a blanket. And that's it's the old college. It's the Midwest. At a point when they had moved down the other side of the hill, the students went in two directions, one into the parking lot and one toward the practice field. The guard came into the practice field, which was fenced on three sides. Students came out. I was actually going around the fence to get back to the parking lot at the time that things got the heaviest. But the guard looked around. There were no students in the practice field. They were fenced in on 3 sides. And they looked at each other and they said, "What have we done?" This is not a tactically great position to be in. There was a huddle. There's some disputes about what was said in the huddle. It was definitely talked about that they needed to get out of there. It was definitely, and there was some later speculation, I'm going to call it at this point, that's the seed of the possibility of firing being discussed. When they were in that bad situation, they moved back up toward the spot where my arrow is now. And as they gradually moved up, the students came kind of back in. There was still a great gulf between them, larger gulf than this gulf here. And they were on an incline, at the top of an incline behind that building with a view down to the students. At some point, a number of guardsmen knelt. A number of others didn't kneel, but were looking around and raised weapons. Some who knelt and some who raised weapons fired. One who was interviewed that I saw did fire at take aim and fire at an individual. He was not one of the kneelers. There's an audio tape that came out through higher technology and was listened to very carefully, and there's an order to fire, but the word fire can be disputed as whether it was do not fire, hold your fire, etc. At any event, the volley of shots rang out in 13 seconds. There were 67 bullets fired in 13 seconds. A lot of chaos. Now, let's talk about the danger to the guard. Some of you may have been in or seen students, young people in Palestine throwing rocks at Israelis, and you've seen news footage. Everyone was hundreds of feet away. If you were throwing a rock at a guardsman, you were throwing uphill. The baseball scouts should have been there if anybody caused problems for the guard, real problems. Dean Kaler was paralyzed for life by a bullet in the spine. He was standing on the practice field. He was at least 300 feet, and he raised his hand to flip the first finger of the day that he had made. The distances of the students in general, the closest might have been 120 feet. Of those who were killed, Sandy Scheuer, who was not apolitical, because at that time it was hard to be, but certainly not an involved person, on her way to class, was shot down 390 feet away. I'm sorry, 400 feet away, 390 feet. ROTC cadet, Bill Schroeder, not part of the rally, shot in the back, dead. Jeff Miller was the closest of the 4. He was definitely involved in resisting through gesture, 270 feet away. Clear and present danger. Allison, 3 shots in the back, 360 feet. As the guard withdrew back over the hill saying, oh boy, back into this area that we're looking at on the common, a lot of students went around the other side. And by this time, there were more than 2,000 students around this side. As they were halfway back to their original position to secure the burned building, they turned toward this group, which was yelling and jeering at them. Only through the intervention of faculty marshals with bullhorns was there not another incident. One of those professors, a sociology professor named Jerry Lewis, had actually published on the subject of crowd involvement, crowd dynamics, the layers that I alluded to earlier. The fact that people can be in a place with all kinds of different levels of either commitment or involvement or curiosity, etc. That group over on the left, I don't know. I wasn't there. But this was a deliberate move toward them, diverting from them. And thank heavens for the good faculty marshals, especially a guy named Glenn Frank, who talked them into it by saying, "Dear God, do you want another one? You know, do you want this to happen again?" So for a moment, that bit of sanity prevailed, and that was the end of it, but it wasn't. They should have shot them all. Does that sound reasonable? That was a refrain through the town of Kent in the immediate aftermath. By the way, the original reports, and this is a lesson learned about initial reports: 4 dead, 2 guardsmen, 2 students. Not quite. The response around the country was more than a quarter of the universities closed or suspended classes. In Kent and in northern Ohio and in the Midwest and in the United States in general, I think there was a lot of they should have shot more of them. Everybody who left, because the campus was, within 3 hours, we were all on our way. The cars were jammed out, getting out of town. There was a state of suspension, if you will. One girl returned to her home and met her father, who said they should have shot more of them. She said, "You know, Dad, you're talking about them shooting me." This is where things were at. We all had to wait for classes to be held remotely, like we've done recently with the pandemic. And we got we had a little gap there, and I got a job doing surveys, and I was sent into high schools. A friend of the family had a little survey company, and it was social stuff about this and that. And when I got the responses about Kent State in these suburban high schools, 75% were, the guard was right. So at Allison Krause's high school, the principal decided that a flag should be flown at half staff in her honor, and it was torn down and burned by conservative students. The inquiries begin. The state grand jury indicts 25 people, all but 1 students, 1 faculty, no guard. The federal grand jury process, those were all, by the way, thrown out. This was for the ROTC building and May 4th, the peaceful rally. Federal grand jury made a few indictments, no convictions. Civil wrongful death cases denied. The federal commission appointed by the federal government, the Scranton Commission, called the shootings unnecessary, inexcusable, and completely unwarranted. No one suffers a penalty. The conclusion by the commission that there were individuals among the students who could get some blame was dismissed by then Vice President Spiro Agnew as pablum for permissiveness. At least Trump saw good people on both sides, you know, for what that's worth. The long-term disputes at Kent were that there were commemorations held every year, and at the beginning, there was a split. It was not a tragedy. It was a massacre. The tragedy side was the university administrators. They've got incoming freshmen. They've got parents. They want to paper over everything. The students and the student community didn't buy it. And for years, there were dual commemorations held at Kent. After I left the city in '73, I didn't go. After the pandemic, I had hoped to go to the 50th, but it had to be held remotely. But it's there. It's with you. It's a bit of a PTSD, but it's more a motivator. And this being Memorial Day, I want to thank for their service every activist who views this. These are the heroes. In any event, the Vietnam Veterans Against the War and the critical mass of students continued to be critical of a lot of things. The Vietnam Veterans Against the War became a very visible and effective vehicle for dissent on the campus. The university's response through the campus police was to infiltrate with an agent provocateur to sell the VVA, to give the VVAW AK-47s. He was outed. His name was Ron Moore. M-O-H-R, if you ever run into him. In 1977, there were plans to build a gym on the practice field where some students were wounded and right next to which some were killed. Current students at that time and former students came together to form an encampment, much like the ones that are being broken up now concerning Palestine. On the day it was announced that the Guard was going to move in and tear the tents down, a lot of people were there. We weren't going to leave. I took a day off of work. I took a day off of work to get my picture splashed across the country. Not this picture, but more of a close-up. These are in the front, some of the old Guard, and a lot of students. And about 400 of us were arrested and quickly bailed by a friend of the movement. And I think it was a $35 fine at that time. That would be 3 digits today, I'm sure. We have then a recipe for suppression here. And because I have to go full screen, I think I have to go full screen. Well, I'm still sharing?
Yes.
Okay. I've got to get to my slides. Because this is such a great academic group, I thought I'd be academic for a minute. This is not original material. Oh, my mouse is killing me here. This is not original necessarily, but it's a dynamic that applied there that I hope doesn't apply to other places. Now let's remember that the loss of life at Kent was 1/100th of what happened at UNAM in '68, while I was out to lunch and later enjoying the Olympics in Mexico City, which was one aspect of the protests at UNAM. You have bad policy, it's generally a violent policy. Because now you've got that vibe going. You've got the blood roiling in favor of the policy, and therefore somebody doesn't agree. But public fear is stoked of not only the original cause, but those who disagree. This justifies the violence. They're going to take our children. They're going to change our way of life. No good. This softens the atmosphere for the will to repress dissent, the public will to repress dissent. These people are other people. Are they people at all? Zero empathy, not only for the original violence, Vietnam, Gaza, Mexico, but zero empathy for those people who stand up. 2 forms of reaction based on incompetence, the National Guard on the practice field, and popular will, the community outside the campus in this case. Enables government and or proxy reactionaries, as we see with the vigilante type people who during Vietnam and today are driving vehicles through crowds. And the violent suppression, in the case of gunshots, out go the lights. In the college context, there's a lot that can be understood. Before reading today's Guardian article, I had included in this presentation that administrators need to understand that they're giving up control when they seek help from the so-called higher authorities. Kent then, Columbia, UCLA now. Even a little fire, and this was not a big fire, it eventually took the whole building down because the building was a bunch of matchsticks. Administrators need spine, not spine against the students, but spine against those who would harm the community that they are responsible for. They're getting paid big bucks. Protest organizers. I'm a fan of the kind of civil disobedience that we did in '77. I'm not claiming that as a 20-year-old, that would have been something I would have thought through. But we were involved in a lot of peaceful protests, and I was in some, smaller meetings to plan them in, and never was violence thought of, except for by the agent provocateur. Now, I have to say this about Ron Moore. That picture that I showed you, was just before the cops bent over to drag us to the bus. Ron Moore was a uniformed officer on the Kent State Police Department still in '77. Ron Moore happened to be in the line in front of this group of people, front row and those immediately behind where I am. Bad choice, but I think it was a deliberate provocation, again, involving Ron Moore, to try and break those chains of solidarity that you see there and break the peacefulness of that demo. Again, they will stop at nothing. They will take no opportunity. Consider how primitive the security state was back then compared to what it is now. So we have those levels of movement. We have the wedges that they try to drive. 10 days after Kent State, 2 students were shot dead in the dorms and several others wounded after a protest of a more racial nature. It's always been long live the spirit of Kent and Jackson State. But the level of attention given to the Black students compared to what happened in white suburban America can't be compared. The outside agitator theory in all cases is bunk. Even at UNAM, where you had older people involved, you have a campus community where people like to live after they drop out or what have you. I did that. They're not outside agitators. The Kent 25, all enrolled students except for one faculty member. Where are these college administrators today? They've got to move forward. We've got to move forward. And we've got to move smartly. And like being on a highway with bad drivers, we have to anticipate the incompetent as well as the evil that exists in places of power. And the fear that we want to put in people in this context is not the fear of the everyday person. It's the fear of the elite, the Democratic Party, for example, the privilege huggers, because we're going after what they are using this privilege and maintenance of this privilege as an excuse to do all these wars and all these occupations. And believe me, they need to be afraid, but we need to bring the people with us. So thank you. And I'm sorry I went too long, and I'm sorry about the difficulties with the tech.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. So we are going to start with the Q&A session. So could you stop sharing your screen, Bob, so we can...
One would think I could by this time. Stop share. Ask admin to enable.
That's it.
Longer an admin? Boy, I would think I
Got it.
Okay.
So the audience, please raise your hands if you want to make a question or a comment. Or if you could write in the chat if you want to ask a question. Okay, before you share your questions, I want to say something, maybe comparing what happened in Kent State with the students' movement in Mexico. I think what happened in the 60s in Mexico helped our system, our political system changed after the students' movement. That I think that was the foundation to start making change and to start working for democracy, for having more more rights in Mexico. So that was like the foundation to stop throwing down this system in which one party always won, no? The Partido Revolucionario Institucional, and that's where it started, and what we have now, we have these chances to make better things for mainly for the social groups that are less privileged in Mexico, no? So that students' movement helped us in Mexico to start changing. I think it's been a long, a very long way, but yes, it's so important to be aware of the students' movement anywhere now in the world, and what's going on today with Palestine. It's the same. The students' movement all over the world, I think they are helping us to make the changes and to finally respect Palestine's rights to be an independent state with all the rights they deserve. So, well, that's my point of view. Mark?
Bob, thank you very much for the presentation and the photos, which bring back haunting memories, some of them. I had a chance, I think in the early 90s to visit Kent State, and there's a memorial statue there. Is it in any of the, I mean, is it in a place near the images you showed of where the event took place, or is it off in another part of the campus?
Are you referring to a vertical statue consisting of many metal plates?
I think so, yeah.
That statue actually predates the massacre and has a bullet hole in it, talking about the wild firing. Has a bullet hole in it. If someone, wow, the bees are invading. Sorry, United States. Sorry, Mossad. Okay. The statue, I would urge folks to Google it. I guess I would look for Taylor Hall statue with bullet hole or something like that. Happens to have represented a couple, presumably a man and a woman. Let's just say a shorter person and a taller person, okay? And the plates, it's clear. And when that bullet hole went through that memorial, through that statue, it became a memorial. around the other side of the building, and that's on the side where the guard stood, and you saw the pagoda. You walked the hill. The pagoda is where the guard kneels, and the pictures are all over the internet. There is another memorial in the facing Blanket Hill on the opposite side of the building. Did you see that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's more of a contemplative space. But I would say that, like you, it is more of a memorial around the other side. I got to do a shout out to librarians. The archive, did you go to the visitor center and archive? They've done a great job. The two bands of protest, of commemoration came together as the students got older and as the archivists got involved with credible presentations. It took a couple of college presidents to retire, of course, before this could happen. But yeah, it's an interesting site. It's like going to any historic site. If you're there in 3D and you can play it in your head. Yeah, I just didn't feel I needed to go to commemorations very much, but I'm glad I went to one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I have another question, but I don't want to hog the floor if others want to ask.
No, it's okay.
So I'm wondering what you know about the population of National Guard members in Ohio at that point in time. I mean, would any of them have been college graduates or potential college graduates, or was there I'm sure there was a class distinction between the Guard backgrounds and those of at least some of the students.
There was at least one Kent State student. There's one Kent State student minimum that was in the Guard called up for the Teamster strike and for Kent State. At least one. Whether that student was an on-campus, they had a nice system of branches. So you could finish at home, you could do your core stuff at home, and then come up to the main campus. And so I don't recall what he was. Also a big commuter population.
Yeah.
From Cleveland and Akron.
Yeah. The reason I ask it is I have a number of colleagues and have spent short visits in Korea, and a lot of the people I know there talk about the fact that military service is obligatory and usually done after you finish your university. Which meant that, Korea's had some very important protests that have brought down governments and whatnot. It meant that, as some of my friends told me, that they often would find themselves and their peers transitioning from one side of the line to the other. That is, they were, as students, protesting, what they call the dictatorship, in the Blue House, and the next year they might be in soldiers trying to contain the student protest, which I don't know. The image of that transition to me is remarkable, but also may in part help to explain why there certainly was violence, but not of the sort even that Kent State and Jackson State experienced.
Well, Nixon was the architect of the Southern Strategy, which is the forerunner of what we're looking at today in terms of division. And a lot of Vietnam vets were and just military vets in general. And the motivation, despite the commercials of those that I talked to and knew, then and since was the paycheck. You know, weekend warrior, it was a piece of cake. I could get away from my family. Who knows? But there were college students, and also the draft was going. So if you were in the Guard, you could have been forestalling being one of those 1 in 10 that the Marines would take. And nobody wanted that. And so in those years, the draft was quite heavy. Those were the big build-up years.
Yeah.
We have time for another question or comment. No?
Well, I'll say something because I'm constantly enraged. I'm very old and I've been enraged for almost all my life. That's over not 75 years, 80 years. We've been at war against the people who are frightened of communism. And people have a hard time recognizing their suppression, and it takes a while for people to come loose and demonstrate against it and work against it and see the origin of the suppression, of the brutality of the nature of the fury against us that does things like just shoot wildly and encourage that kind of behavior and have that attitude behind them. I just saw something yesterday on TV that they're sending people who have been soldiers in various places where there's been brutality against their populations. They're taking those soldiers and sending them as peacekeepers. Why? Same reason. They're getting paid in a huge amount more, and it's something to do for people who have no grasp on what's going on. It's so hard for such a big society to grasp the origin of what's going on to us. Very hard.
Well, you know, the question of the draft is interesting in the sense that we've gone to these mercenaries. Bush did it big time in the Iraq wars, and gone away from the professionals. And the draft was not anything that anybody wanted because the causes were not just. I think most people would be able to find some legitimate reason to defend their country. But we don't see those usually. They're ill thought out. They're either poorly researched or manipulatively researched. And, you know, the universal service idea, the idea that Mark was talking about in Korea, what they do in some of the European countries, you know, I think it makes for a little more understanding, if nothing else. I don't like the draft being misused by the U.S., but I'm open to the possibility that someday it might be legit.
Thank you. Thank you.
What I'm looking at is this fear of communism that the nations throughout the world are right to worry about because it's creeping in regardless. People are pushing ahead with the requirement that they live well, safely, etc.
Well, the boogeyman that's outlived the height of the communist movement is wealth redistribution, and they say, "Well, you're trying to redistribute wealth," and the answer is yes.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, that's what communism is. Communism is us having everything together, including our labor, our minds. Our minds, we're tormented. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a wonderful presentation.
Well, thanks for those who listened and put up with my unexpected incompetence.
Everybody has it.
So thank you.
Tell me something. You're saying you weren't at Kent State, right?
I was there. I was in the park. I was moving toward the parking lot when the guns were
In
fired.
1970?
Yeah, I was a freshman.
That makes you older than everybody else in the universe. What?
No, 72.
Okay.
Class of 69 high school.
Thank you for clearing that up for me.
Yeah, a youngster.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you to the audience with us. And please remember to make your donations to the center. And we will see you in our next presentation. Thanks for being here today. Bye.
For the presentation. Thank you.